Hi, I'm Drew Downs, and I want to talk about radioactive language. So, something happened last night in Washington, D.C. Two staffers from the Israeli embassy were killed. They were murdered. And the person who was arrested allegedly was shouting "Free Palestine." So there is a complexity to language that requires us to communicate sometimes more effectively than we care to. Most of our language, most of our attempts to communicate with one another rely on our shortcuts that we use, the uses of language and the meanings that ride along with other words that we use in an attempt to try and compel other people to see things the way that we do. Like, this is a natural part of communication, but it's not something we spend a lot of time thinking about. On a day like this, however, when you're reading an article in which you are trying to recognize the delicacy of the situation and the nature of the politics, it may be interesting, perhaps, to note what happens in the news stories, that happens in the way we reflect on it. Because in the article I read, it was about halfway through, it sort of shifted to the response from the President of the United States, President of Israel, from staffers, and what happened in paragraph after paragraph after paragraph was a repeat, a repeat, a repeat. It was a refrain. Anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism. And nothing shuts down debate. Nothing silences our ability to reason like this particular word. It prevents us from seeing the nuance or comprehending the depth of the tragedy, let alone the tragedies that have preceded it. It has become a kind of toxic word that we can't handle. We can't break it apart. We can't utilize. It's itself so destructive to play with that we can't know what's happening or what's true, let alone what is actually at the heart. When we say anti-Semitism is a way to silence what's real, what's actually happening there. It's a way of preventing us from seeing what would motivate a person other than that. It's one of the reasons many of us don't like to essentialize. We don't like to essentialize racism, or don't like to essentialize gender discrimination or sexual identity discrimination. Like, there's a way in which we don't want that, because it prevents us from showing what is actually anti-Semitic or racist. In this case, targeting the person as a member of the embassy should be, I would argue, more significant than whether or not one of them was Jewish. It is more significant that this is the office that they hold than their religious and ethnic affiliations. This should be at the heart. At the very least, these should be taken in equal measure. But to essentialize it as the one and not the other prevents us from seeing the comment that the person was trying to make. This is also brings up another word, and a word that I think has the sort of opposite problem, and that is terrorism. The word terrorism has a definition, it has a meaning, and it has an intention, right? What we mean by terrorism is an act, a political act of violence or threat of violence that intends to cause fear and a silencing of a particular people. So the concept of terrorism is a means of trying to promote a political agenda. People who are using acts of terror almost always have a political agenda. And what happened in 2001 for a lot of people in the United States is it created, we were being taught and trained to stop looking at the political agenda and look only at the national and ethnic agenda. Difference between the perceived difference between a unspoken white America and a brown Arabic Middle East. That terrorist would be coded by nationality and race, not by politics. It's also the refusal or the late concern about losing the power of a word like terrorist or terrorism. If we dare to use it in reference to acts of domestic terrorism, why that shows how hollow that argument really is, because it's not. It's about the politics, and when they're trying to get us to not talk about the politics. What is common in both of these elements is not that these words themselves are toxic or radioactive. It's that this radioactivity that is present in the political response to these moments renders these words useless or of less use to us, because they're taking and stealing what's most important about them, which is to name this act, these things, as wrong. And so when we use them poorly or in ways that obfuscate the reality, it prevents us from actually dealing with what we've got. In this case, anti-Semitism is being used to avoid talking about politics, to avoid talking about the situations in which we are in. It is a way of perpetuating genocide. It's a way of perpetuating violence. It's a way of perpetuating murder and death, and trying to make us feel bad about the deaths of these two people and feel nothing about the deaths and the starvations in Gaza, right? This is the intent. The flip, of course, in the use of terrorism is they don't want us to think of things as terrorism. They don't want us to think in lines of terrorism because we might think of it as worse than we would otherwise. When you had those jerks marching in Charlottesville several years ago, they didn't want us to call this terrorism because they wanted us to think of terrorists as other people, and they didn't want to show the political motivation. They didn't want us to see or associate a far right group, collection of groups, to be affiliated with a political movement. Now, at the heart of this, of course, is a political movement that is at the heart of the most deadly terrorist attack in American history, and that was the Oklahoma City bombing, which was performed by people who were part of the white power movement and were in a movement within the white power movement that is referred to as the Christian identity movement. And that movement seeks to create a white ethno-state within the United States, or to overtake the American government and declaring it a Christian white ethno-state. And with that, and by means of violence or intimidation to create this world. So they have two branches of it. One is isolationist, so they want to create their compounds and ignore the government and will fight the government and bomb the government. And another branch wants to co-opt and utilize the government. It's why avowed racists and members of this movement, like David Duke, end up being excited at the rise of white Christian nationalism, as it's being talked about now, which is just another variation of the Christian identity movement, or at the very least, they're using the same methodology. So, all of this, right? All of this is deeply political. It is entirely political in nature. And all of these attempts to get us to not look at that politics, to not cede that the sort of the ground over talking about politics. They wipe that away and have us thinking about the ethnicities and have us thinking about not wanting to offend people we think of as friends. These sorts of, this language, it doesn't serve us well. It creates a kind of radioactivity around the language that is not the same as being politically charged, because we're trying to steal and remove or hide the politics from it. It is intentionally political. It's not radioactive because it's political. It's radioactive because it's trying to hide the politics and pretend it isn't there. So what do we do? Where are we in this? How are we supposed to respond to these moments, to this situation, to this words, to toxic and radioactive language? And I would say to be loving people, to be people who don't need to worry about these things, in part because we are sharing and knowing and telling the truth, because we are recognizing what is politically dangerous for our people, what is politically dangerous for those who are underserved in our communities, those who are most at risk, those who are in the most harm's way at any one time. We care for the millions who are suffering. We care for those who can't care for themselves. We care about things. And caring about things is the root of all of these things. So please continue to care, to love, to hope, to share with one another what is most important in the world: your love, your attention, and your grace. Be well, my friends, and we'll see you soon.